Good morning and welcome to Art of Life Explorations. My name is Angela Hardy. I have a business called Cloud9 and I teach people how to love themselves and love their lives and have a joyful, wonderful experience of life. Today in Art of Life Explorations, we're talking to the most fascinating woman. She does something called craniosacral therapy, which I have been interested in for forever. And I have experienced myself. It's a really, really interesting therapy. It's so subtle and so powerful at the same time. And Justine Hunt, who you're going to meet in a moment, does craniosacral therapy amongst other things. And today we're going to talk all about trauma and how I work with trauma and how Justine works with trauma and can help yourself with trauma. And we're just going to explore that a little bit and discuss it a little bit. So welcome, Justine Hunt.
Hi, thank you.
Justine, what's the name of your business? It's Blissful Being.
Blissful Being, yeah. I try to empower people to be in their bliss. Be in their being.
You're in good company then, because that's actually exactly what I do. It's such a crazy world that we live in that we have to learn how to be happy. I mean, don't you find that extraordinary?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I find so many of the people that I work with, even I treat babies and children and adults, but a lot of the adults that I'm treating, their body, their cell tissue memory is carrying trauma. It's carrying trauma from years ago, from even their birth, as far back as their own birth, you know. So I think if we can find a way of managing our trauma, managing our responses, our automatic responses and our fight or flight mechanism activations, and learn how to control those either with regular therapy or just with our own home mechanisms and relaxation techniques and meditation, we can really start to empower ourselves and live our best life.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, when I work with my clients, we work in a process that helps them to start to understand how does the mind work to create the felt experience. And the biggest part of that is to see that when we have experiences as we're growing up, even when we're very young, before we have a verbal capacity to understand or express it verbally, these things tell our unconscious, this is the world. This is who you are in relation to the world. And this is how you get to survive the world. And that gets very, very stuck. It gets stuck in the way that our brain processes life, but it gets stuck in all of the tissues of all of our body. And I guess when you're working with babies in particular, you're working on that. But even all the way into adulthood, you can still be holding that stuff that you learned from very young.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we call it a process of limbic imprinting, which actually happens in the limbic part of the brain, which is the emotional, very sort of subconscious, unconscious emotional response center. And that limbic imprinting from your first 24 hours of birth is an experience that your brain will remember for the rest of your life. And that imprinting will then actually manifest exactly like you're saying, Angela. It will manifest in automatic responses, automatic behavior, automatic thinking responses to your environment, whether you're feeling safe, whether you're feeling scared, whether the world is perceived as safe to you, you know. So comparing a natural, easy birth where there was candle-lit room and very calm and the midwife and music playing and, you know, the baby comes out and can hear the mother's voices and is immediately skin on skin, that limbic imprinting will reinforce safety, love, security, that infant or that person growing up into an adulthood will have a sense, a deep-rooted sense that the world is safe, as opposed to an emergency cesarean section, bright lights being taken away immediately, having just taken their first breath and then having that first breath suctioned back out of their lungs and maybe, you know, turnix scrubbed off them or going into NICU and those kind of things. That imprinting will stay with that child, that this world is scary, that it's not safe, that they have been isolated or abandoned from the mother. So a lot of the time I'm treating, you know, the sooner we can treat the babies and children when they're still very young, to actually, we can release that sense of trauma from the brain. We can help to re-imprint that this world is a safer place. And I think a lot of the people we're seeing in the world today, like you say, to teach us happiness as adults is just old patterning. It's old patterning that can be undone. It's just a process.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like actually every birth should follow directly with some craniosacral therapy.
Yeah, I definitely, it would be my dream, because I honestly think we would change society. I think we would be functioning as a very different society if all of us weren't carrying around all of this sort of unconscious processing from a traumatic birth that we weren't even aware of, I find that a lot of the babies I treat, as soon as I start treating them, even if they're a few months old and maybe they've had colic or they're struggling to sleep and those sort of symptoms manifest, which is, again, that fight or flight mechanism of the body. And we need to shift the fight or flight back into the rest and digest functioning, or balance that homeostasis again. A lot of the moms will immediately say, but they're not only sleeping better and their digestion's improved and they're not crying so often, but they're just happier, smiling children. They're just engaging. They're making more eye contact. So I believe inherently we are social creatures. We are social beings. I mean, with all of this COVID, we're realizing that we're all missing that social engagement. And I think inherently, if we can come back to that place within ourselves where we are able to reconnect, not only with ourselves, but with each other and with the world in a much healthier way, it would be quite a different society we'd be in.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the truth is that as an adult, most of my clients come to me because they're not consciously aware that there's some trauma or some, I mean, many people obviously do have sexual abuse and emotional, mental abuse and bad experiences and bullying and all that kind of stuff as they grow up. But a lot of people we have these behaviors and we're looking at these behaviors and we're saying, these things don't work for me. I can't live my full experience of life with this behavior on board, with this fear of failure, with this fear of rejection, with the sense of myself that I'm not enough, with this. And so it's this constant argy-bargy within them, this fight against these behaviors. And the funny part of it is, of course, that those behaviors are just symptoms. They are pointing us in the direction that there's something underneath that needs to shift and change, some way of doing life, some way of understanding our place in life and how the lack of safety is created, how the lack of sense of our security or our lovability or our enoughness is creating, and how we can recreate that. But for those people who don't know what craniosacral therapy is, because to me it's the most curious and fascinating and wonderful therapy, why don't you just go ahead and explain a little bit about what cranio is and how it works?
Okay, so craniosacral therapy is very gentle, as you said earlier, Angela. It's very powerful. What we're actually doing is we're tuning into cell tissue memory, and we're actually able to feel from the tailbone or from the head or from different parts of the body. We're actually able to feel that cerebrospinal fluid flow of fluid up and down the spinal cord. So it's in a rhythm of 4 to 14 cycles per minute. As a doctor can feel your heartbeat and your pulse rate, we're actually feeling that movement of the fluid up and down the spinal cord. We call that craniosacral rhythm. And we're able to feel the pulls and twists of the membrane system around the whole brain and the spinal cord. So from the coccyx tailbone attachment all the way up the spinal cord, there's 3 layers of membrane system, which then envelop and wrap around the brain. And it's all one continuous system. So whatever's happening at the lower back or the tailbone will influence what's happening around the neck and the cranium, and vice versa. So it's kind of like if you think about a tablecloth and you're pulling one corner of the tablecloth, it's going to affect how the rest of the fibers of that tablecloth is lying. And that's exactly how our nervous system is, our central nervous system. Obviously, exiting all of that whole membrane system, we've then got every single nerve that supplies the body, whether it's a cranial nerve or a spinal nerve. So that integrity and alignment of that membrane system is so crucial to the health and functioning of the entire nervous system. So we actually find that membrane system actually contracts during stress and trauma, whether it's emotional stress or physical. So whiplash injury, major fall, trauma, car accident, something like that, or a severe emotional stress like sexual sort of session of rape, or major emotional trauma, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, or a specific incident like losing a loved one in a very traumatic way, things like that, will actually contract that membrane system, which will then influence the movement of the cerebrospinal fluid up and down the spinal cord, which is carrying oxygenation to the entire nervous system. It will also influence then all of the nerves exiting from the spinal cord and from the brain. So we find that that really shifts the entire nervous system then into that fight or flight functioning, which will influence everything. So the body responds in the fascia restricts, the blood supply gets reduced around the organs, and nutritional absorption is affected. You can also then have obviously fascia in different parts of the area different parts of the body, depending on the injury, might also be restricted, which will affect blood flow, which will affect lymph drainage, venous drainage of the area. So it really does create a lot of knock-on physical symptom effects. And what we're doing by stretching out the whole membrane system around the brain and the spinal cord is we're actually treating the cause of the problem. So that's where the cause of the issue is, and then obviously we can also go to the arm or the limb and work with that. But for example, even with people, like if they're doing major dental work and they've had a lot of, they've had to keep their mouth open for a few hours having implants or something like that done, and the drilling through the facial bones and all of that, it really can affect and tighten up the whole rest of the system. So there's 20 different cranial plates. And they're all floating on the membrane system. They're all attached on the membrane system, but they're connected by interdigitated sutures. And nature's so amazing because it's created it that there is allowing a certain amount of flexibility and movement. So as that cerebrospinal fluid moves up the spine into the cranium, we find a slight flaring of the cranial plates. And then as the fluid contracts and moves back down the spine, away from the brain, there's a slight movement back. So we call that a flexion extension movement of the cranium. It's almost like the skull is actually breathing, like you can feel your rib cage opening and closing with your breath. It's a very subtle movement, but the whole cranium is actually opening, allowing the cerebrospinal fluid to flow up into the cranium, and then it's slowly pushing together, and that cerebrospinal fluid is pushing down the spinal cord. So if there's been a major injury, physical, or as I say, it could sometimes be in response to a major emotional trauma, and that membrane system has contracted, we then feel the limited movement of the cerebrospinal fluid, which limits the oxygenation of the brain. It limits the oxygenation of the whole nervous system. It will then keep that fight or flight function activated, and it can affect your hormone balancing as well within the brain and the pituitary gland. So there's so much vast conditions that we actually can treat with the cranial work, because our nervous system is our center of our entire existence, including not only our physical being, but our perception of reality, as you were saying. How are we thinking, the thoughts we're thinking, how we're able to perceive reality, how we're able to respond to our world, around us.
Yeah, I do a treatment called NOT, Neuro-Organization Technique, also working on the it's a type of kinesiology, actually. It also works on the nervous system. And what's really, really interesting about that nervous system is that when our body goes into fight or flight, if it doesn't reset itself, and so that's part of that whole, these duromembrane being able to move against each other, the spinal fluid being able to move. But it's also, if you think about how we prepare ourselves for fight or flight, those toes curl in, the Achilles heel locks down, the tailbone tucks under, the spine stacks up, the jaw clenches, we twist away from danger, or we twist towards danger. We get all these twists and fixations up the spine and in the muscular structure around it. And really we have to find a way to say to the body, it's okay.
Exactly.
That experience is over now. You may reset. And I always describe it as like a DV board. So you're in your house, you've got a DV board, something happens, there's a lightning strike, all those little plugs go down, all the switches go down. And you come back up and you try to push those switches up. The body's only designed to take 20 minutes of stress every 72 hours. So we slapping that DV board down every 5 minutes in that current modern life. And you try to push these switches back up, but the body is still stuck in that previous stressor. And because it's going down, there's no time for the body to say, oh, okay, I'm back. Let me reset. And what's really interesting, I mean, there's so many really beautiful treatments for that kind of fight or flight reset. TRE does an amazing job. There's a friend of mine in Cape Town that's using it extensively at the moment herself. And what's wonderful about that is that you can learn how to do it and then help yourself with it, which I love.
Exactly.
But if you're not getting a chance to rest and relax and take that body out of the fight or flight and let the whole nervous system know you're okay now, essentially what happens is that the body acts as though it's still in that stressful danger situation. It's
100%.
playing the message over and over again, right? I'm still
Yep.
in danger. I'm still in danger. I'm still in danger. And the guy that I was watching with this NOT thing was saying it basically makes you a weaker creature in the jungle.
Totally. And I think because, people don't realize high stress levels actually impacts your immune function. So your immune system actually becomes deactivated if you have ongoing stress. So that, people kind of often say, oh, I'm just a little bit stressed, but they don't realize the ongoing continuous stress without the reset will have a massive effect on how they're functioning, like you say, every day, just functioning out of this fight or flight mechanism. But in terms of a physiological response, it's changing your hormones. It's you're living out of cortisol hormone, which is your chronic stress hormone. You're functioning out of adrenaline. It changes your insulin levels. It deactivates your immune response. So much else is happening from that stress. And I think especially with today's world, with all of the stuff we've been dealing with, things were complicated before, but I think with all of this COVID stuff, it's affecting people on a much more drastic level. And I think it's just so important to find a modality, whatever works for people, that will help to reset that nervous system. I often have a lot of people coming to me, adults that are very stressed. They'll say, I'm a 9 out of a 10 stress level. They're having insomnia. They're struggling with all sorts of other physical health ailments because of this whole functioning of the fight or flight, and it's affecting their nervous system responses. And about half an hour, 25 minutes into the session, they're actually falling asleep on the bed because they're giving themselves that quiet time away from technology, away from cell phone stimulus, phones ringing, computers and all of that. And I'm slowly stretching that whole membrane system out. I'm responding to the body. So whatever's happening, whatever it needs to do, the body actually guides the treatment. We feel the twists and pulls. We just follow. We're just present with whatever's happening. We allow things to release and stretch. So it's kind of like doing a very deep, powerful meditation, but you're being facilitated to go into those quite deep, sort of more uncomfortable places. And once that membrane system stretches and releases, their whole system starts to function differently. Their hormones start to function differently, blood supply changes, and everything around the organs. And people just start to completely relax. But it can also facilitate a lot with sort of big trauma release and things like that. So I facilitate people through specific releases. But a lot of the time, most of my clients walk out feeling energized. They feel relaxed. They feel content. Their thought processes have changed, because like you say, that fight or flight mechanism, it actually activates different thought processes. That high level of cortisol in the nervous system and the brain will activate those thought processes of always trying to be on guard and trying to sort of protect yourself. And physically, people get so much tension in their neck and shoulders. And that itself creates tension and limits blood supply around the brain and the spinal cord entry into the neck. So I find that once they've relaxed, they say, I feel completely different. And the children are amazing because children don't even know what's happening to them, but they'll just start playing and run around and do things completely differently than how they were before. So it's really amazing how our bodies can heal if we give it the chance, if we give it the right tools and the opportunity.
Yeah. For me, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because I find it so interesting the way that I work, teaching people how to watch the mind, to manage the mind, to see how the mind is creating these experiences. Such a wonderful combination of having that multidisciplinary effect to say, I have a way that can release the stress that I've created, but also I need to learn how to manage myself on a daily basis. I need to learn how to watch that mind in action, because it's the mind that's doing it. It's the mind that's saying, this is the meaning of this experience, and the body that is reacting in turn. And sometimes it's the body that's saying, I've had this experience before, and the mind that's reacting in turn. And we have to learn. It's wonderful. You and I, we treat these things, we work with people. We can help you really to have this very quick experience. But also, we have to manage our lives. As individuals, we need to learn to look to how do we help ourselves? How do I learn to use my mind in a way that is powerful and positive in my life? How do I learn to watch that mind? How do I learn to even understand how the mind works? Because that's the big thing. We have this complete misunderstanding of where safety and security comes from, where happiness comes from, where a lack of stress comes from. We all think it comes from the outside in. It's a complete misunderstanding. It never comes from the outside in. It is always generated by your own stuff. And so trauma early on in life is going to be this kind of little linchpin on which the stuff is generated. In that moment of trauma, not necessarily even the experience itself, but the inability to speak to somebody about that experience, or to have somebody hold you in that experience, or have someone take care of you in that experience. Mm-hmm. This is where we then develop these ideas in our unconscious about who we are, how strong we are, how weak we are, what we have to do in order to survive, how we have to look after ourselves, how we have to give up our authenticity to get attachment. And when you were talking earlier about the baby that comes out in the cesarean sections, gets whipped away from the mother, that was quite interesting to me, because I've recently been doing this trauma course with a guy called Gabo Mate, and he speaks about abandonment a lot. And I have a friend with 2 adopted children, and of course abandonment, as far as he's concerned, you cannot not have abandonment issues. If you've been adopted, it's going to happen. And it was so interesting to hear that, I mean, you don't have to be abandoned for long.
No, I mean, I've treated, the one child I treated was about 2 years old, and they were still, you know, it was starting to go to sort of preschool. The child was going to preschool a little bit and things like that. And that's when the mother came and brought them to me and said, you know, they've had ongoing, obviously there was already some trauma symptoms there from the birth. They were a little bit colicky after the birth, and they were never easily into a good sleep pattern, and they never had a great appetite. So those things are already warning signs that the nervous system's not in good balance of the fight or flight and the rest and digest functioning. But this little one started preschool, and I mean, it's normal for them to maybe have a little bit of, you know, their mommy fuss, and they're struggling a little bit at first to be dropped off at preschool, and a little bit of that abandonment issue. But it escalated to the point that this child became sort of severely traumatized, and they were acting out of severe trauma in response to having been, you know, dropped for 3 hours at preschool. But it was completely, you know, even the teacher had said, this is not, you know, this is not what we normally see. Yeah. But what was happening is that being left for 3 hours in preschool was triggering that initial response of having been taken away from the mother immediately after birth. And as an adult, we might be able to rationalize it and go, okay, you know, they were taken away for an hour or 2, you know, had the lungs suctioned and the vernix scraped off their body and all of those kind of things. But it's for that infant. Yeah, it can be severe trauma, and they don't have a concept of time at that point, you know, at that age. So that might have felt, you know, we can't conceptualize how long that felt like for that child of infant, of not hearing the mother's voice, not smelling the mother. You know, children, babies especially, we forget we're animals, you know, and we've got such innate strong, powerful senses that are there to protect us in our systems. But the babies can smell the mother's milk from 1 meter or 2 away. They can hear her voice. They know her heartbeat. So to be taken away from all of that after 9 months of sort of growing and developing in utero can be severely traumatic for some of the children. And I think that, again, will be a trigger for that level of abandonment. So it doesn't even have to be, like you say, an adoption or something like that. I mean, that's obviously on a different level as well. But it could just be that you're taken away from your mother for a few hours after the birth, or maybe your mother was, you know, maybe there was a problem, or she was ill or bleeding or something like that. But we often find with those children, when I'm treating them, is that during the treatment, at some point, they suddenly like want the mom, and even the dad, you know, or they'll grab hold of the parent while I'm treating them, and then they just want to be held. And they're actually resetting that patterning of that severe abandonment issue. And the mom will get home and phone me a few hours later and say they haven't stopped kissing me, they haven't stopped hugging me, but it's not a needy, clingy attachment of lack. It's more an expression of love, of I'm feeling safe, I know you're here. It's kind of like a relief, you know, that these children kind of reset their system and go, I'm still okay, she's still here, it's all okay.
I can trust
and so I think, you know, even as adults, we sometimes rationalize into our minds, that, okay, this situation is fine, or I'm over it, or it's safe. But what I think, what the work that you're doing as well, Angela, and the work that I'm doing, is that we need to reset the body. The body needs to understand that it's all okay. That the cognitive thinking, the processing, our perceptions need to change. So with the work I'm doing, it's very much physical cell tissue needs, that's what we're actually shifting. When we stretch that whole membrane system, when you've got increased blood flow to the brain, different neurals start firing, neural synapses start firing, everything starts functioning very differently on a hormonal, physiological level. But like you saying, it's so good to be in conjunction with someone like yourself, because I can reset the whole functioning and the anatomy and physiology of the actual nervous system and the body as a whole. But that person also needs to be mindful of their thoughts, of recreating that trauma, of staying in a dysfunctional relationship, of continuing to be in a job that is dissatisfactory, which is continuously activating that fight or flight mechanism. So that's where I find that there needs to be a behavior change counseling and behavior change therapy, and teaching the person how to then manage the ongoing stresses of life. So I can help to reset all of that with the nervous system, but people also, a lot of my clients, I then need to start trying to counsel them into all of that. But obviously you're more equipped with that. That's what you actually do, So I just find it's amazing how people transform. It's like I say to my clients, some of them, if they come every now and then for 6-month period, and they're also receiving other therapeutic help, it's like watching a little blossom, a little bud, and you're watching that flower open. It's amazing just to see how we can open and express ourselves and trust the world and start loving ourselves and each other and engaging on a completely different level, because it is all about what's within us and our perception of reality. And a lot of it, like you say, can be very unconscious. And if we can shift that unconscious patterning, we're able to be more conscious of how we want to engage with the world and how we can engage with ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad to see how, whenever you speak on a spiritual kind of a level or a connected level, and we speak about what is it that we really want, ultimately we're all looking for a sense that there is love. I am love, I'm lovable, you are love, you are lovable, we can connect on this level of love. And yet it's not easy to connect on that level of love when we have this experience of ourselves that we're not enough, or we're not lovable, or that we have to somehow prove ourselves as sufficient, or that we have to earn the love, or that, and all of this has got to do with attachment, lack of attachment, and our sense of who we are in the world and how we have to go about living in order to get what we want. And it is really beautiful to take somebody through that journey from that place of I'm crap, I'm not enough, I hate myself, I hate my life, to I get to love myself unconditionally. Yeah. And in that unconditionality, I understand what it is, what kind of belief systems I held, what sabotages I held, what I thought was true that is so now patently untrue, that kept me stuck in that way of being in the world, that I was self-protective and I was a victim, or I was afraid, or I had to be aggressive, or I had to prove myself, or I had to be afraid of failing, or all of that kind of jazz that keeps us cycling round and round and round in this push against the world. I want the world, I mean, my greatest desire is that I should move easily through the world. Not that the world itself is easy, because it never will be, but that I can flow with those experiences. You know what I mean? When it's hitting the fan, it's hitting the fan, but I know myself to be okay. I know myself to be sufficient, despite the chaos that's going on with the fan out there. You know what I mean? And when things are going my way, I can know I'm okay. And when things aren't going my way, I can know I'm okay. And I can still express and work from that unconditionality of self and unconditionality towards other people. And for me, it was such a huge journey to come from that massive amount of self-protection that I had as a child and well into my adulthood, until that place of going, oh, I don't have to do that at all. It's okay. I don't have to live like that. And that is, there's this combined process, as you say. It's the learning, and it's getting that stuff out of your physical body.
Exactly.
Craniology is really helpful for that. I know that craniosacral therapy is amazing for that. Have you heard of Perrin technique?
Sorry?
Have you heard of the parent technique?
Yes, a little bit. I have, yeah, a little bit.
It's very interesting. A friend of mine is a physiotherapist. She uses it. Do you have to be a physiotherapist or something to use it? I don't know. But they're so funny. She says to me, "Oh, Ange, I'm going to go and learn craniosacral therapy." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because you know these like doctory types, like craniosacral therapy, too schwa for me. And off she goes, and she's like, "No, I'm going to go and learn craniosacral therapy because this parent technique uses a combination of physiotherapy and craniosacral therapy for chronic fatigue."
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's probably the only thing that can help chronic fatigue.
So I treat a lot of chronic fatigue. I mean, I'm also a physiotherapist. I don't know if you knew that, but I'm also a physiotherapist. So I studied the cranial work in London as a physiotherapist there, and then came back to South Africa. But I find I treat a lot of chronic fatigue, and we get amazing results because, again, it's that whole fight or flight activation of the adrenals overactivating, and then they become eventually fatigued because they can't keep producing so much adrenaline. So we reset. There's actually a membrane that runs across the middle of the brain. So you've got your hemispheres above and your cerebellum below. And that membrane runs right forward over the pituitary gland. And that often tightens a lot with long-term stress and emotional stress. And when we stretch that out, it actually releases the whole blood supply and functioning of the pituitary gland. It starts to reactivate and reset the entire functioning of the pituitary gland. And we find that that has massive effects on rebalancing any sort of fight or flight mechanisms with chronic fatigue, even people with Hashimoto syndrome. And I've treated people that are struggling with menopause, early menopause, or not starting their menstrual cycle as a young sort of teenager, all of those kind of things. It's amazing how the body can reset with those things. So yeah, I just, you know, I'm always in awe actually of how much the body can heal. If people are open to it, you know. For me, the cranial, it's just like you were saying, the Cranio has shifted my whole reality, my whole being. I also struggled, you know, in a lot of self-protection mechanisms when I was younger. And the cranial work was just like just blew my mind, you know, it just opened my world, because even practicing as a student, we practice on each other. We all started having our own releases and our own processes. Which was amazing. I was very shy. I was always very shy and withdrawn as a teenager, even into early adulthood. I started studying the cranial work. And I think after about a year of having treatments and everything, I just started talking all the time. I just didn't stop, you know. And
authentic self.
When I started, I remember when I did my first TV interview a few years ago, I had someone phone me from high school that tracked me down and phoned me, and they just said, "I just saw you on TV. I can't believe you're the same person. Like you're open and you're chatting and you're confident, and you know." But this was my true authentic self. This always was who I was meant to be. But I had a traumatic birth, and then obviously trauma through childhood also accumulates, and I had to release all of that stuff out of my system. I had to stretch my membrane system. I had to change my neural functioning. I had to change my hormone balancing for me to then be able to feel confident and strong enough to be able to just express my true self, you know. So it's quite amazing the processes that can happen with all of these kind of modalities, you know. It really does feel like I always sort of explain to my clients, it's like watching that little caterpillar in the cocoon, you know, and then you're waiting and watching it grow, getting ready and growing these beautiful wings until it just opens up and comes out of that cocoon and just flies free, and anything's possible, and you can just love, like you said, just there's no attachments or all of these sort of lack, you know, anything that's of lack. It's just now you're actually able to just be love and be loving and connect with other people on that vibration, which is completely different to the lack response that we often have, you know, from any trauma.
So Rochelle Miller, who seems to have popped off again, said, "Good to see you, Justine, on this platform." So that's cool. Somebody popped in to say hi.
Oh, she's wonderful. I actually practiced I practiced from her house for quite a few years. We're good friends. Yeah, she's an amazing practitioner as well. She really facilitates and helps people with a lot of their emotional journeys and that as well. So it's great to hear her. Yeah.
Okay, so of the work that you do and the work that you know of, give me your top 5 ways of working with trauma.
So For craniosacral therapy, I find that we can do a lot of trauma release. We can do boundary work where we just very gently tune into the fascia, and we actually connect with how the body's responding to different things. So I can even move to different places in the body, and you can sense and you can feel, and the person will be able to tell you, I feel like this, or I feel like that, or that's activating a bit of a fight or flight response within me, or I can feel my heart rate increasing, or so, we can do a whole lot of boundary work with that. So definitely we work with that. Then I would say, any kind of psychological support, any kind of work where someone is able to express themselves, talk through things like you're saying, I think that really can help people as well. And then, kinesiology is wonderful as well for reconnecting with the body. But then I think it's important for people to bring self-work into it. Meditation is very powerful. Relaxation techniques are very powerful. Being aware of your breathing is massive. Most people don't realize how they're not breathing properly. So they're breathing with these apical muscles here in the lungs and the chest, and that's your fight or flight response. You only keep activating these muscles in the neck, you're tightening them up and creating more spasm. The diaphragm underneath the lungs is actually got your vagus. So your vagus nerve comes out on either side of the neck and travels all the way down. Your vagus nerve is the biggest nerve in the body. That's your parasympathetic, the biggest parasympathetic nerve in the body. And your parasympathetic is your rest and digest. So it travels down through the neck. It slows the heart rate, increases the depth of breathing, and then it moves through the diaphragm and into the abdomen and the digestive system. And it opens all the sphincters of the digestive system, increases blood supply of all of the organs, promotes peristaltic movement, and increases nutritional absorption. So what we find with the apical breathing is that people aren't breathing properly, and they're not stretching. The diaphragm is that dome-shaped muscle that actually needs to be pushed down. That is what actually gets the lung capacity to increase, getting deeper breath. So it pushes down, but at the same time as the diaphragm is pushing down by taking nice deep breaths, you're actually massaging that vagus nerve. You're actually activating the vagus nerve to start functioning properly, so when people say take a deep breath, it actually is helping your body shift back into rest and digest from fight or flight. The first thing that we do when we're in fight or flight is we stop breathing properly. We start to breathe here with the lungs and the top of the apical muscles, instead of pushing the diaphragm down and letting the belly rise. So true deep diaphragm breathing, we're actually letting the belly rise and fall. The shoulders should be minimal movement. Even here should rise a little bit, but it should be minimal movement. What should really be happening with our diaphragm breathing is that the stomach is actually rising and falling. As that diaphragm is pushing down, it's pushing the organs down, which will make them rise into above the abdomen. And then we bring the breath back up. So you get that rise and fall of the tummy. So it's so important. If you're feeling stressed or you're feeling tired, self-care, just find a quiet place or lie down or sit and just actually focus on your breathing, be aware of your breathing, and let your abdomen rise and fall. That's already starting to reset the vagus nerve. It's already shifting your body physiologically out of the fight or flight mechanism. So I find in my practice, and as in my personal life, should I say, the biggest thing for me was to learn good techniques of relaxation, breathing, and meditation. It can be so powerful to help us to just be aware of our thoughts, be aware of our being. That's part of the name of my business, is just coming back into our being. A lot of the cranial work, we're holding space, we're holding a very quiet meditative space where your body can express whatever it needs to release and express. And so I find that in itself, just being aware of what we're feeling, moving out of the reactivity, because often we're always reacting to life. We're reacting to the taxi driver or the noise or the children, and if you can just come back into a place where you aren't reacting to anything in a quiet meditative space, you're actually then able to automatically start being aware of your own perceptions, your own thoughts, your own feelings, and the physical awareness and feelings throughout the body. So I would definitely have meditation as one of the top of the 5.
Yeah. I would say mindfulness and meditation, if you want to grow and be aware of doing the growth, do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
person that's taking charge of growing mindfulness and meditation, learning the nature of the mind, how the mind works to create your felt experience, and learning to work with that primary objective. You have to do that. For me, I love the kinesiology. I use the kinesiology all the time when I'm working with my clients, because it has the capacity to not only, you know what's happening with your body, you know that you've got to do the work and the growth. And I meld that into working with the kinesiology to help people to actually shift what's going on subconsciously, unconsciously, in sabotage programs and belief systems, and in the way the body's holding this information. And that's, in the same way that craniosacral therapy works, we got to work within the body, because nothing is just held in the mind. Nothing. No,
and I think, exactly. And I think that's what's so important, is that the person has to have their own relaxation or meditation technique to have the awareness. But often they get stuck and they don't know how to move past that. They don't know how to still release that. They can observe that I keep reacting this way, or this thought pattern keeps emerging, or this physiological response of maybe like a panic attack keeps emerging in sort of different circumstances. So they can be aware of it to an extent. And like you say, then you need this facilitation with kinesiology, with craniosacral therapy, to facilitate out of that process, and help the person. But I think a combination of mindfulness, meditation, and then sometimes people need the psychological support. Sometimes there is something they need to be able to talk through and process that was maybe a specific trauma, or an ongoing trauma, or a dysfunctional relationship, or something like that.
Or just that learning how to manage the way that thinking creates life. I mean, for me, it's the greatest thing that ever changed my life. More than any other therapy I ever did, more than any other thing that I ever did, was the understanding that I am doing the thinking that's creating this moment. And I might not be aware of it in this moment, but I'm the one that's doing that. Yeah. And that was so powerful, because it takes you away from that idea that you're the victim of life, or that you have to defend against life, or that you have to make life change so that it can make you okay. And to realize that everything is happening internally. Every part of my experience of this thing that's happening is happening by me.
And so I love it. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of, I actually did my thesis, I don't know if you've heard of it, Angela, about epigenetics. But I mean, for me, that's just a physical expression then of exactly that we are powerful. We do have the power within us. Our body is expressing in any given moment what our thoughts, feelings, and behavior is creating within us. So I love that, because, every little cell of our being is either being, having a good serotonin, like a happy hormone, or dopamine attachment onto that membrane system. And then that's going into the nucleus of the cell. And that's actually activating which genes are being expressed by our DNA. So the happy hormones are normally expressing the healthier genes, the sugar balancing and all of that kind of thing. Or the cortisol, the stress hormones, are then attaching to that membrane system and going into the nucleus of the cell and starting to actually activate maybe insulin problems, or a diabetes gene, or something. So, we're only expressing 10% of our DNA at any given time, but we're in control of what DNA is being produced. And that's where I love that. Like you're saying, we're not the victims. Society seems to create this whole thing of there's an external world and it's happening to us. We are in control. If we use our breathing, if we use our awareness, if we use different tools and modalities and people to support us, we can recognize how much empowerment we have within us, and how much we're controlling not only our thoughts and our feelings, but our actual physical expression physiologically of those thoughts and feelings that's happening on a cellular level, which is amazing.
Well, Justine, it has been a sweet pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you.
A moment there quickly.
Sorry?
Your email address?
It's JU. Or do you want maybe my business one? BL. So it's blissful being.
Yeah.
J Hunt.
Yeah.
@gmail.com.
Great. So I'm going to pop this little sucker at the bottom over here, because this is such clever software, I can do it. May as well make it happen. This is how you can get hold of us. Blissful Being is Justine. Oh, that is not correct. Hold on a second. Yours might be, but mine is not. It's not info. It's not info@cloud9. It is info@cloud9.co.za. That is how you can get hold of me. So if you are looking to have work done on old trauma, if you're looking to have some stress relief, some way of resetting yourself, of coming back to yourself, Quick Sticks Fix Justine will help you with your body. You can come to Cloud9 if you're suffering from a lot of anxiety and depression. I have the 2 flotation tanks. They're amazing for anxiety. They've done a lot of work for post-traumatic stress and anxiety disorder using the flotation tank. So I have the 2 of those. If you're looking to go on a journey to really help you to see life in a different way, to experience and access yourself in a different way, and to have a growth experience of moving towards a sense of unconditionality towards yourself, a sense of enoughness, a sense of happiness, more peace, more joy, less stress, and you want to work on that with somebody, I'm your gal. So you've got 2 really good resources here. Do meditate, do learn to be mindful, do look at your mind and heart's working, and do make use of other people to help you, because it's really, really difficult to navigate this world all alone. When things get confabulated, when things get stuck in your body, it's not something that you can necessarily just help yourself with like that. It really is helpful to just go to somebody and have a little support in that moment. And I have a friend who's a physio who says, you know, Ange, most of the people who come to me get most of their healing just by having somebody touch them and listen to them. And when she said that, it's so true. We need to have support. And sometimes we actually want support from somebody who's not our immediate family, somebody who we can just go, bleh, because we're not having to protect somebody else or look after them or make sure that they're okay. So
yeah, I think that objectivity, hey.
Yeah, just to have somebody to be there. I mean, I have a lot of clients who are very, very, very powerful, very rich, but they sit at the apex of their businesses and it's tough at the top. You know what I mean? They just want to have somebody who they can sit down, chillax with and say, hey, this is what's going on, and let's just rumble. You know, that they don't need necessarily advice or to be helped or anything like that. They just need somebody to be able to be there and have a chit chat with. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that I do also. So that's from us today. I hope that's useful for anybody who does check in and listen and get some useful information for you. Justine will put her details at the bottom of this on my Facebook page, and she will share this to her Facebook, although she tells me it's not a very active page. And I'll share my details on the bottom of there. So if you want to get hold of either of us and check out any of the free stuff. Do you do any free stuff, Justine? Do you do any talks or anything like that? Any YouTubes, anything like that?
I've got a whole lot of YouTubes linked to my website. So it's www.blissfulbeing.co.za, and there's a whole lot of different TV interviews and YouTube streaming that I've done there as well. So they're welcome to have a look at that. And I'm just in the phase of moving my Facebook page over to Instagram, but I'm still busy with that. So
okay. So you can check Justine out there, and you can check me out also on my website, which is cloud-9.co.za. And I have a YouTube channel, which I'll list below, which has got loads and loads and loads and loads of free videos, all about learning to love yourself, all about how the mind works to create your felt experience. They can be really helpful for you. They're absolutely free. And so you go and grab those and play around a little bit and see if you can help yourself. Thanks very much for joining us, Justine. Thank you so much for being with me today. It's been really, really interesting.
Thank you so much.